Aurora Volusus, go and stand at the back. Yes, of course.
Who claims you?
No one.
A throne carved from black moon glass. A king who has not smiled in 7 winters. And a girl nobody bothered to look at twice. They told her to stand in the back. With the servants. With the unwanted. Aurora Volusus had learned long ago that being invisible was safer than being seen, because when the half-fae, half-wolf healer with no magic was seen, it was only to be mocked. To be measured against her sister and found wanting. To be reminded again of all the things she was not. So when the great doors of the Court of Veiled Moons groaned open, when the cold poured in off the mountain and the candle flames bent low, she did what she always did. She lowered her eyes. She made herself small. She disappeared into the gray. And then the feared Moon-Fae King Leontinus Blasio walked the length of the hall like a storm wearing a crown, and the disappearing stopped working. He moved past 1,000 glittering, perfumed, worthy fae females, past the ones who'd spent a month preparing, past the ones who'd been born for exactly this moment, and he stopped in front of the one in gray. The whole court held its breath. He tilted her chin up with one ringed finger, cool, deliberate, impossible, and his eyes searched her face. Silver eyes. Ancient. Utterly without warmth. The eyes of a man reading a language he thought he'd buried with someone he loved. Who claims you? He asked. Low. Dangerous. A question that wasn't really a question at all. And Aurora, too foolish or too tired to lie, whispered the truth. No one. The candles died. Every flame in that hall guttered out at once, all together, all in the same heartbeat. And from somewhere deep inside the king's chest came a sound no fae had heard in 7 years. A wolf. Growling. At her. Before we step 1 inch further into that silence, tap subscribe. Because what happens after a Moon King's wolf chooses a girl who was never supposed to be chosen is not something you want to walk into halfway. Hit the button, stay in the dark with us. Trust me, you'll want to be here for every turn of this one. Also, quick honesty break. If a brooding immortal king ever snuffs out an entire ballroom with the sheer force of his feelings over you, that's not a red flag, sweetie. That's a whole flag parade. Marching band included. Anyway, subscribe so the algorithm stops shoving Aurora and Leontinus into the back row the way that court did. Okay, deep breath, back to the growling. The Court of Veiled Moons had 3 laws. The moon must always be honored. The king must never be touched, and the dead queen must never, ever be spoken of. Aurora knew all 3 by heart. She'd grown up in the long shadow of that court, daughter of a fading house, sister to a girl far prettier, child of a bloodline that had thinned year by year into almost nothing. They said she was broken. A hybrid who couldn't shift fully into wolf or hold fully to fae. A healer whose hands barely glowed when they should have blazed. Too wolf for the fae, too fae for the wolves. Belonging nowhere is a particular kind of cold. It seeps in slowly. It teaches you to expect less, then nothing at all. Aurora had made her peace with being no one. She'd folded herself up small and tucked herself into the corners of other people's lives, and she'd survived there, quietly, unbothered, unseen. She had not made peace with being wanted, because the moment King Leontinus Blasio's wolf growled into the silence of that hall, the moment a man who feared nothing looked at her like she was the one thing in the world that could undo him, every careful, invisible wall Aurora had spent 20 years building began, quietly and terribly, to crack. And somewhere in the dark beyond the court, a golden-haired man named Cosmo Aldekai watched it happen and smiled. Because he had been waiting a very, very long time for a girl exactly like her to walk into that hall. The summons came for her sister. Of course it did. Aurora Volusus was everything the court adored. Silver-blooded, full-fae beautiful, with magic that bloomed off her skin like frost flowers on a cold window. When the king's heralds rode down from the Black Mountain and announced the choosing, the great gathering where every unbonded fae of standing would present themselves before the throne, Undine had begun preparing the very next morning. Aurora had begun preparing too. The salves, the luminous oils that kept Undine's skin glowing, the tinctures that took the shadows from beneath her eyes. The quiet, careful work no one thanked her for, and everyone assumed simply happened on its own. "You'll come as my healer," Undine had said, not looking up from her mirror, turning her face to catch the light. "In case my feet blister from the dancing. There'll be a great deal of dancing." "In case you're chosen, you mean," their father said from the doorway. Lord Valerian Volusus was a tall man gone thin with disappointment. His eyes passed over Aurora the way they always did, sliding off her like water off glass, as though she were a piece of furniture he kept forgetting he owned. "The king will choose someone this year," he went on, smoothing his cuffs with long, pale fingers. "The court demands it. 7 years a widower. A throne cannot mourn forever." He straightened. "Aurora, you will stand at the back. You will speak to no one. And for the love of the moon," his gaze flicked briefly to her hands, "you will keep those hidden." Her hands, the hands that glowed too faintly to be called true fae light. The hands that had never once knit a broken bone the way a real healer's should. "Defective," the court physicians had murmured when she was small, turning her wrists over, frowning. "A wolf-blood mongrel pretending at magic. Pity the house." Aurora curled her fingers into her palms. "Yes, father," she said. The court of veiled moons was carved straight into the side of a black mountain, its great halls left open to the night sky so that the moon could pour its silver down across the marble like water. Aurora had never once been permitted inside before. She had only ever seen it from below, glittering on its peak like a crown the mountain wore. Now she stood inside it, and she pressed herself into the very back row, between a serving girl and a cold stone column, and tried, with everything she had, to disappear. It almost worked. For nearly an hour, it worked. The herald announced the candidates one by one. The court murmured and judged and sipped from goblets of moon wine. Aurora watched it all from the gray shadows and let herself fade, the way she'd faded her whole life, comfortable in the smallness of being unseen. Then, the great doors at the far end of the hall opened, and he walked in. She felt him before she saw him. A pressure in the air, a drop in temperature, that breathless, weighted stillness of the half-second before lightning strikes the ground. The crowd parted without being told to. The perfumed, jeweled, worthy candidates sank into curtsies that rippled across the floor like a falling tide, one after another, all the way down the hall. King Leontinus Blasio. He was taller than the stories. Darker. His black hair was woven through with thin threads of silver that caught the moonlight and held it. Along one side of his throat ran something that wasn't quite a scar. A fine web of gray, like cracked glass beneath the skin, like something dead had once tried to take root inside him and never fully left. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Silver, yes, but empty, scraped hollow. The eyes of a man who had buried something precious and then bricked over the grave so he'd never be tempted to dig it back up. This was the king who had not smiled in 7 winters, the monster king, the children whispered. The one whose grief had frozen the whole court around him like the heart of a glacier. He walked the long line of candidates slowly, looking at none of them. His gaze slid over the most beautiful females in the kingdom, the way her father's gaze slid over her, there and gone, registering nothing. Undine rose as he neared. Radiant, perfect, certain, he passed her without so much as a glance. Aurora's heart was pounding now, hard, for reasons she could not name. Stay invisible, stay small, stay gray. Stay... He stopped, in front of her. The silence that fell was so complete, she could hear the wax dripping from the candles. She could hear her own blood roaring in her ears. The king's nostrils flared, just slightly, as though he'd caught a scent that did not belong, something that had no business being inside his court at all. His head tilted. His brow drew low, and then he reached out and tilted her chin up with one cool, ringed finger, and Aurora forgot entirely how to breathe.
Who
Who claims you? He asked.
No one.
Somewhere behind him, she heard Undine make a small, strangled sound of pure fury. Aurora should have lied. She knew the lie even as the moment came. My house claims me, my father. I am here only as a healer. Forgive me, my king. I am no one of consequence. It was right there, ready, the safe, small answer that would let her sink back into the gray. But his eyes were holding hers. And underneath all that scraped-out emptiness, there was something straining toward her, reaching across some invisible distance, and the truth fell out of her before she could close her teeth on it. No one, she whispered. The candles died. Every flame in that vast hall snuffed out at once, altogether, plunging the court into pure, cold moonlight, and from deep inside the king's chest rolled a sound that made 1,000 fae recoil as one, a wolf, low, possessive, growling. His finger was still beneath her chin. His hand had begun very slightly to tremble. That's not possible, he said, quietly. To himself. No, not to himself. To whatever had just woken up after 7 years inside him. They tried to remove her. Lord Valerian was on his feet at once, stammering, bowing, reaching for Aurora's arm to drag her out of the hall before she could shame the house any further. The master of ceremonies was already lifting his staff to call the next candidate, desperate to paper over the impossible thing that had just happened in front of the entire court. But the king had not let go of her chin. No one, Leontinus repeated, softly, like the words were a wound he was pressing his thumb into. His silver eyes had narrowed to slits, and they were searching her face like it held an answer to a question he'd stopped asking years ago. You feel that? He murmured. Again, not to her, to the thing inside him. 7 years of nothing, 7 years of silence, and now... He released her so abruptly that she stumbled back into the column. For one heartbeat, his composure cracked clean open, and Aurora saw something terrible and raw flash across his face. Hope, maybe, or terror, or the unbearable weight of both at the same time, pressing him down. Then the mask slammed back into place, colder and harder than before, sealing it all away. Leave her, he said to her father, and the command struck the hall like a hammer on a bell. She remains at court, under my protection, until I understand what I just... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Until I decide otherwise. Then he turned and was gone, his black cloak snapping behind him like the closing of a heavy door, and Aurora was left standing in the moonlight with 1,000 burning eyes fixed on her and her sister's nails digging crescents into her wrist. What did you do? Undine hissed, low and venomous, her perfect face twisted. Nothing. Aurora's voice shook. I swear to you, Undine, I did nothing. But the court of veiled moons did not believe in nothing. By the time the trembling servants had relit the candles, the whispers had already begun to spread like frost across glass. Witch, schemer, mongrel, how did the gray girl bewitch the king? What did she slip into the moon wine? And Aurora understood, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the quiet, invisible life she had built was over, burned away in a single whispered word. She was given a room, a real one, with tall windows facing the king's moon garden, with a fire already lit in the grate and linens finer than anything she had ever slept on in her life, finer than her sister's even. The servant who showed her in would not meet her eyes and bowed too low and fled. Aurora did not sleep in the fine bed. She sat on the cold stone of the hearth instead, knees drawn up, and stared at her hands in the firelight. The faint, useless glow at her fingertips. the thing the physicians had called defective. And she tried and failed to understand what the king had felt in that hall that she could not feel herself. A knock came near midnight. She expected a servant. She got a stranger. He leaned in the doorway like he'd built it. Tall, golden-haired where the king was dark, broad through the shoulders, with an easy, sunlit smile that seemed almost violently out of place in this cold mountain court. A fine hunting blade hung at his hip. His eyes were the warm amber of a creature that had never once, in its whole charmed life, doubted it was loved. "So," he said, "you're the one who made the moon go out." "I didn't make anything happen." He tilted his head, smiling. "That's not what the whole court is saying." He pushed off the doorframe and strolled into her room uninvited, easy as anything, and picked up one of her healing vials from the side table, turning it in the firelight, watching the liquid catch the flame. "I'm Cosmo," he said. "Cosmo Aldekai, master of the king's hunt." A bow that was somehow mocking and gallant at the same time. "And I am, I think, the only soul in this entire frozen palace who is delighted you've arrived." "Why?" His smile widened a fraction. "Because nothing genuinely interesting has happened in the Court of Veiled Moons since the day the Queen died. 7 long, gray, boring years." He set the vial down with surprising care. "And you, little healer, you are about to become the most interesting thing this court has seen in all of them." Something in the way he said the Queen died, light, almost fond, like a man remarking on the weather, made the fine hairs on Aurora's arms lift one by one. "Be careful, though," Cosmo added, already turning back toward the door, his broad back to her. The warmth had drained right out of his voice, like a candle snuffed. "Leontinus doesn't choose people. He consumes them, slowly, without ever meaning to. Ask the last woman his wolf wanted." He paused in the doorway, glanced back over his shoulder. "Oh," he said softly, a small, regretful laugh. "Forgive me, you can't. She's dead." And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the moonlit corridor, and Aurora stood alone in the firelight with her heart hammering against her ribs and a single awful question putting down roots in her mind. What exactly happened to the Queen? The next summons came at dawn, not a herald this time, a single black feather laid across her pillow, and a servant who would not meet her eyes and spoke in a whisper. "The king requests you in the hollow observatory, alone, at first light. Tell no one." Mistress Yvain caught her in the corridor before she could obey. The old healer was the only soul in the whole court who had ever shown Aurora real kindness, a stooped, sharp-eyed crone with hands gone gnarled from a lifetime of mixing tinctures, who had quietly taught Aurora every salve and stitch and poultice she knew. Now Yvain's wrinkled fingers clamped around Aurora's wrist with a strength that did not match her years. "You're going to him," Yvain said. It was not a question. "I have no choice." He commanded it. "No." The old woman's milky eyes searched her face, and there was raw fear swimming in them. "No, you don't. So listen to me, girl, and listen close. Whatever the king shows you in the dark, whatever he asks of you, do not heal what he asks you to heal. Promise me that." "Why on earth would I refuse to—" "Promise me, Aurora." But Aurora could not promise, because the servant was waiting at the end of the corridor, wringing his hands, and a king's command was not a thing one delayed to argue with an old woman. She gently pulled her wrist free, and she went. The hollow observatory crowned the very peak of the Black Mountain, a vast dome of dark glass left open to the gray dawn sky. Star charts drifted through the air inside it, slow and luminous, like living constellations that had wandered down from the heavens to think. And in the center of it all, his back to her, stood Leontinus Blasio, without his crown, without his court, without the cold mask he wore before the world. He looked smaller like that, and somehow, far more dangerous for it. I have not slept, he said. He did not turn. Not since you spoke those words in my hall. The wolf will not be still. It paces. It will not let me be. My king, I never meant to disturb. Come here. She came, and the closer she drew to him, the stronger that strange pull became. The same straining she'd felt in the hall, two halves of some torn thing reaching for one another across an aching void. And she could see it clearly now, in the cold gray light of morning, the web of gray at his throat. It had spread since the choosing. It was creeping upward, toward his jaw. He turned. And he pulled aside the collar of his black shirt to bear the full horror of it. A spider's web of dead, cracked gray, rooted deep into the skin of his chest, spreading over his heart. 7 years ago, he said, his voice very low, very even. My mate died of a withering curse. They told me it was the work of an enemy court. They told me nothing could be done to stop it. His jaw flexed. I held her in my arms while the gray took her, hour by hour, strand by strand, and I, a king, a wolf, a creature feared across 3 kingdoms, could not do a single thing to save her. Aurora's breath caught in her throat. 3 winters ago, he went on, it appeared on me. It's killing you, she whispered, slowly. I have perhaps 2 more winters in me, less if it quickens. A bitter ghost of something that was almost a smile touched the corner of his mouth and died there. The court does not know. They believe their king is merely cold, cruel, drowning in his grief. His silver eyes lifted to hers, and for the first time they were not empty at all. They were desperate, and the desperation in them was the most human thing she had ever seen on his face. But in the hall, Aurora, when the wolf woke for you, I felt the gray recoil. For the first time in 3 years, it stopped. It stopped spreading. Because of you. He took her hand. He pressed her faintly glowing fingers to the dead gray web over his heart. Heal me, the Moon-Fae King whispered. Please, I am asking you. Please. And Aurora, who had never in her life healed anything graver than a blister or a fever, felt her useless, faint, defective power flare to sudden life against that curse like a struck match catching dry tinder. Heat surged up her arm. Light bloomed at her fingertips, brighter than it had ever been. The gray hissed where she touched it and shrank back, recoiling from her hand, and beneath it, woven down into the curse, into the dead magic clutching his heart, she felt something that turned her blood to ice water. The curse was not dead at all. It was alive. It was aware. It was watching her work, the way a spider watches a tremor in its web. And it knew her name. My king, she breathed, her hand trembling against his chest, the light flickering. This was no enemy court. This curse, it was made by someone who loved her, someone who knew her. The threads of it, they're so careful, so tender, you only weave something this patient for someone you... She lifted her eyes to his, and what she saw there frightened her more than any magic. Someone who is still inside this court, Leontinus. The hand that made this never left. The council summoned her 3 days later, not to thank her, to break her. They sat in a half-moon of carved black thrones, 12 high lords and ladies of the court of veiled moons, ancient and glittering and cold as the mountain itself. At their head sat Magister Thornwald, his long beard rimed white as if with permanent frost. At his right hand, Lady Sibylla Vorn, who looked at Aurora the way one looks at a stain spreading across fine cloth. And there, near the back, leaning against a pillar with his arms folded and his amber eyes bright with private amusement, Cosmo Aldekai. You stand accused, Magister Thornwald intoned, his voice like ice cracking on a deep lake, of bewitching his majesty. A mongrel half-blood, daughter of a fallen house, possessed of no magic worthy of the name, and yet presuming to ensnare the king of the veiled moons in your web. His lip curled. We have seen schemers before, healer. We know the smell of ambition. It clings to you. I never asked for any of this, Aurora said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. I came as my sister's servant, nothing more. And yet here you are. Lady Sibylla's voice was silk drawn slow across a blade's edge, sleeping in royal chambers. Summoned to the king's private observatory at dawn. Tell us, girl, what exactly do you do for His Majesty behind those locked doors that takes him hours, every night? The chamber rippled with cold laughter. A sleek dark-fae noblewoman near the front laughed loudest of all. Vela Shiath, who had spent 3 years quietly fashioning herself into the king's rightful future queen and did not intend to be unseated by a girl in gray. She's a healer with no healing, Vela purred, examining her own nails. A wolf who cannot shift, a fae with no fire in her at all. She is nothing, Magister. We all see it. The kindest thing this council could do is send the little nothing home to her fading house before she shames us all further. Aurora's face burned. The old instinct rose up in her, fast and familiar. Lower your eyes. Make yourself small. Go back to being gray. Go back to being no one. It's safer there. It was always safer there. The great doors of the council chamber blew open. King Leontinus stood on the threshold, and the temperature of the entire room dropped 10 degrees in a single breath. He crossed the floor in utter silence, no herald, no announcement, just the slow, lethal certainty of his stride, and stopped beside Aurora. Close, deliberately, pointedly close, his shoulder very nearly brushing hers. Then he turned and faced his own council with an expression that drained the color clean out of Magister Thornwald's frost-rimed face. You called my healer before this council, the king said, very softly. Without my leave, without informing me. My king? Thornwald stammered. The court has concerns regarding Vela Skiath. Leontinus did not raise his voice. He never had to. The wolf did it for him, a low thread of menace running beneath the words. You called her nothing, in my hall, to her face. His silver eyes moved slowly across every single face in that half-moon of thrones, and not one of them could hold his gaze. So let me tell you all something, and I will say it only once, so I suggest you listen well. This woman has done what every physician, every mage, every wise old council in this court could not manage in 7 years of trying. A pause that could have cut through stone. So be very, very careful how you speak to her. Because the next soul in this court who calls her nothing. He let the wolf fully into his voice, and it rolled through the chamber like thunder breaking over the mountain. Answers to me. No one breathed. No one moved. Vela Shiath had gone the color of old ash. Then the king turned, and he offered Aurora his arm, publicly, before the entire council, before the 12 who'd gathered to destroy her, and he walked her out of that chamber with her hand resting on his sleeve, leaving 12 of the most powerful fae in the kingdom, seething in silence behind them. Only one person in the room was smiling. In the corridor, once the king had strode on ahead to speak with his guard, Cosmo fell into step beside her. All his easy golden warmth flowed back into place, as though it had never left. Spectacular, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Truly, you've made yourself a great many powerful enemies today, little healer. Half that chamber would happily see you fall down a long flight of stairs. He leaned in, conspiratorial, charming. Lucky for you, then, you've also made yourself one very useful friend. He pressed something cold and small into her palm as he passed. A key. Iron. Old. Heavy with age. The Royal Archives, he whispered against her ear. Section 13. If you truly want to know how the Queen died, how Caelora really died, you'll find what they sealed away down there. But Aurora... His amber eyes glittered, catching the moonlight. Do not let him catch you reading it. He sealed it for a reason. And then he bowed and was gone, and Aurora stood alone in the cold corridor, looking down at the iron key in her hand, feeling the solid floor of her certainty tilt beneath her feet. Because for the first time she could not tell, not for the life of her, who in this court was reaching out to save her, and who was patiently, smilingly, working to feed her to the dark. That night, Mistress Yvain found her sitting by the fire, staring at the key. The old woman went white as bone. "Where?" she said, very slowly. "Did you get that?" "Cosmo gave it to me. He said the archives hold the truth about Cosmo." Yvain sat down hard on the hearthstone, as though her old legs had simply given out beneath her. Oh, child, what have you stepped into?" She reached out and took Aurora's faintly glowing hand in both of her gnarled ones, and her voice dropped to almost nothing, scarcely louder than the fire's crackle. "I have to tell you a thing now. A thing I swore on your mother's grave I would carry to my own. Your power isn't weak, Aurora. It never was. Your power was sealed. The very night you were born, to hide what you are from a world that would have hunted you for it." Aurora went still. "You are the last of the silver thread line," Yvain whispered. "The last true thread weaver in the world, and someone clever and patient and very, very dangerous has been waiting years for you to come of age and walk through that door." "A thread weaver," Aurora repeated. The words felt strange in her mouth, too large. Yvain had pulled her out of her chambers and down into the old abandoned infirmary in the depths of the mountain, lit a single guttering candle, and bolted the door 3 separate times before she would say one more word. "The oldest magic there is," the old woman said at last, "older than the moon court, older than the wolves, older than the fae. The silver thread weavers could see the bonds between living things, the invisible threads of fate, of love, of family, of mate bonds, of curses." Her breath rattled. They could mend a torn bond with their bare hands, or sever one clean, or trace a curse back along its own threads, all the way to the hand that first cast it. Aurora stared down at her glowing fingers. "Kings went to war to own them," Yvain went on. "Whole bloodlines slaughtered to keep weavers from their rivals. So the line was hunted, year by year, down to nothing. All but one, your grandmother, who took her own daughter, your mother, and hid her away in a fading, harmless little wolf-blood house at the edge of nowhere, where no one with power would ever think to look for a treasure." Her milky eyes glistened wet in the candlelight. "And when you were born, and your gift showed itself in your cradle, plain as the moon, your mother came to me on her knees weeping and begged me to seal it, to bind it down deep, to keep you small, forgettable." Yvain's voice cracked clean in half. "Safe. She decided it was better that her daughter be mocked for nothing, and alive, than a hunted treasure, and dead." Aurora looked at her own hands as though she had never seen them before in her life. "That's why the curse recoiled from me," she breathed, the pieces falling together one after another. "In the observatory. That's why his wolf—" She stopped, her stomach dropped. "His mate bond, his broken mate bond. The wolf doesn't want me, does it? It feels the weaver in me. It thinks I can mend it," Yvain finished, grim and gentle at once. "Or weave him a new one to replace what was torn away. The wolf can't tell the difference, child. It only knows one thing, that for 7 years its bond was a screaming, bleeding, open wound, and the moment you walked into that hall the bleeding stopped. It should have felt like a betrayal. It should have hollowed her out. He doesn't want me. He never did. He wants what my hands can do for him." But Aurora kept seeing his face in the gray light of the observatory, the desperation in his silver eyes, the single broken word, "please," and the wound in him that had nothing at all to do with magic, the loneliness of a man who'd bricked over his own heart and forgotten how to breathe. She used the key that night. Section 13 of the Royal Archives was not a library. It was a tomb of sealed grief. Leontinus had ordered every record, every portrait, every scrap of writing that touched on Caelora locked away in the deep dark so that he would never again have to read her name. Dust lay thick and undisturbed over everything, soft as gray snow. Aurora's weaver sight, half awake now, humming low and electric beneath her skin, lit that dust up like silver frost the moment she stepped inside. She could see the threads now, faint ones, everywhere. The ghost of every hand that had ever touched these shelves. She found the Queen's healing records, the court physician's notes from her final days, the handwriting growing more frantic, more hopeless, as the pages went on. And then, near the very end, she found the thing that stopped her heart cold in her chest. The withering curse that had killed Caelora had a signature. All weaver work did. Yvain had told her that, hours ago. A unique pattern threaded invisibly through the magic, like handwriting, like a fingerprint pressed into wet clay. And here, traced out in the dying physician's desperate, shaking hand on his very last page, was a careful sketch of the strange pattern they'd found woven through the Queen's blood as she died. Aurora knew that pattern. She had felt it 3 days ago, with her own hands. Over the King's living heart, the same curse, the same signature, the same patient, loving, monstrous hand. Caelora and Leontinus, a queen and her king, struck down 7 years apart, both withering beneath the work of the same caster. Someone patient enough to murder a queen with infinite tenderness, then wait, and begin to slowly murder the grieving king who mourned her, all without ever once falling under suspicion. She pressed her glowing hand flat against the inked sketch on the page, and she pushed her weaver sight down into it, chasing the signature back along its own threads toward its source, the way Yvain swore the old weavers could, and a voice spoke, soft and warm, from the dark behind her. "You really shouldn't have come down here, little healer." Aurora spun around, her heart slamming into her ribs. Cosmo Aldekai stood in the archive doorway, lit gold from below by his own torch, that easy, sunlit smile still in place on his handsome face. But his amber eyes had gone flat and cold, and entirely, utterly empty, and the warmth had drained out of him completely, all at once, like a mask he had finally grown tired of holding up and simply set down on the floor. "I'd so hoped," he said, stepping inside, "that you'd take a little while longer." Cosmo set his torch into an iron bracket on the wall, slow and unhurried, and leaned his back against the door, blocking the only way out of the buried room. "I hoped you'd find it," he said pleasantly. "Eventually. You Weaverbloods are so wonderfully predictable, you know. So easy to steer. Dangle one little forbidden secret in front of you. Add the smallest seed of fear about the king, then simply step back and let your own curiosity do all the work for me." A soft, fond laugh that had nothing kind in it at all. "I've been patient, Aurora, 7 whole years patient. Do you have the faintest idea how long 7 years is when you spend every single day of them smiling?" Her weaver sight was screaming now, fully awake, blazing, impossible to ignore. Standing this close to him, she could see them clearly, the threads spilling off his hands like smoke, gray, withering, patient and tender and monstrous. The exact same signature she had found in the Queen's blood. The exact same one rooted over the king's heart. "You killed her," she said. The words came out flat with horror. "You killed Caelora." "I loved her." For a single moment the charming mask slipped away entirely, and what lay beneath it was so much worse than cruelty, something twisted and grieving and rotted black, a wound that had festered for decades. "I loved her before that cold, cursed bastard ever once laid eyes on her. We were promised, did you know that? 2 great houses bound since we were children. I was going to be her husband." His voice trembled, cracked, and then the Moon-Fae King's bond chose her, out of nowhere, on a single night, and the whole sniveling council fell over themselves to hand her to him, and I was expected to stand at the back and simply smile. Cosmo, so I smiled. He said it like a curse. For 2 years I smiled, at their wedding, at her coronation, at the way she came to look at him, And then, when I could bear it no longer, I made her a gift. A withering thread, woven so slow and so subtle and so gentle that by the time it finally took her, no one, no physician, no mage, no counsel, would ever once think to look at her grieving, devoted master of the hunt. His amber eyes glittered in the torchlight. I held the king back from her body so he wouldn't see me weeping with joy. Aurora's stomach turned over. And the curse on him, a second gift. Cosmo's smile crept back, terrible now. He took the only thing I ever wanted. So I am taking everything from him, slowly, the way he'd appreciate, if he understood it. First his queen, then his health, then his crown, then his mind. I had it all so beautifully planned. He pushed off the door and took a single step toward her. And then you walked into his hall. A silver thread weaver, the one creature left in this whole world who could trace my 7 years of work straight back to my hand and unravel every thread of it. His face hardened to stone. Your bloodline was supposed to be extinct, Aurora. You weren't supposed to exist at all. He drew the hunting blade from his hip in one smooth motion. It caught the torchlight, long and cruel. I am not going to let you mend what I have spent 7 years so carefully breaking. Aurora did not think. She threw herself at the sealed archive window, weaver light blazing white off both her hands, and the ancient binding threads woven into the rusted latch came apart at her touch, unraveled like she'd been doing it her whole life, like the magic had only ever been sleeping. The window banged open onto the freezing night, the whole black mountain falling away into darkness far below. She scrambled through onto the narrow stone ledge. Behind her she heard Cosmo's footsteps, unhurried, certain. A man who had waited 7 years and was in no rush at all. She ran. She ran the ledges and the moonlit outer stairs of the mountain, wind tearing at her, weaver light still crackling off her trembling fingers, and she did not stop until she reached the one place in the entire court she knew she'd be safe. She burst through the doors of the king's chambers without knocking, gasping for breath, hair wild, hands still glowing. Leontinus came off his bed in a single instant, every line of his body gone lethal, the wolf rising behind his silver eyes. What happened? Who hurt you? It's Cosmo. She could barely force the words past her heaving breath. Leontinus, it's Cosmo. He killed Caelora. He's killing you. The same curse, the same hand, the same signature. I traced it in the archives. I saw it with my own eyes. The king went utterly, terribly still. Cosmo Aldekai, he said slow and low, has been at my side since we were boys together. He hunted at my flank. He carried Caelora's body to her tomb on his own shoulders. He wept at her grave. I watched him do it. I held him up. A muscle leapt in his jaw. And you stand here and ask me to believe? I am not asking you to believe me. Aurora crossed the room in 3 strides and seized his hand. The bold, forbidden, impossible touch the third law of the court expressly forbade, and pressed it flat against the gray web spreading over his own chest. I'm asking you to feel it for yourself. Open the bond, my king. The one that's been screaming inside you for 7 years. The one you've kept locked and bleeding and silent. Open it, just once, and let me show you what's truly woven into the thing that's killing you. He looked down at her for a long, long moment, at her hand on his chest, at her glowing fingers, at her face, and then the Moon-Fae King, who let no one touch him, who trusted no living soul, who had buried his whole heart in the ground with his queen 7 winters ago, closed his eyes and opened the wound he had guarded with everything he had. Aurora poured her weaver sight into him through the open bond, and he saw, through her eyes, woven all through the gray curse rooted in his own heart, Cosmo's signature, Cosmo's tender, patient hatred, Cosmo's smiling 7-year twofold murder laid bare at last. When Leontinus Blasio opened his eyes, they were no longer empty. They were no longer even quite human. They were wolf. Cosmo did not run. That, in the end, was the most frightening thing about him. When the king's wolf came roaring down the moonlit halls of the court of veiled moons, Aurora racing at his side, they did not find a fleeing man. They found the master of the hunt waiting for them in the great throne hall, calm, golden, blade already in hand, standing easy at the foot of the black moon-glass throne, surrounded by a dozen of his most loyal hunters and 3 council members who had quietly thrown in their lot with him. Lady Sibylla Vorn stood among them. So did Vela Siath. "Leontinus," Cosmo called out across the hall, and his voice was almost warm, almost the old voice, the friend's voice. "You look unwell, old friend. Has the little weaver been pouring stories into your ear?" 7 years. The king's voice was barely something a throat could make. The wolf rode in every word. "You stood at her grave. You carried her body. You let me hold you up while you wept. I stood at the grave you dug for her." For the first time, all of Cosmo's easy composure cracked clean through into pure, naked, decades-deep hatred. "She was mine. Promised to me before you ever drew breath in her presence, you cold curse thing. The council handed her to you on a single night because your wolf decided to howl, and I had to watch you take everything that was meant to be mine." His knuckles went white on the blade. "So yes, I made the thread. I wove it with my own 2 hands, and I watched her wither slow in your arms, and I will tell you, Leontinus, it was worth every year of smiling, just to see your face when she went." He raised the blade. "I had meant to finish you slowly, to savor it, but I find I'll settle for finishing you tonight." The hunters charged. What followed, the court of veiled moons would speak of in hushed voices for 100 years. Leontinus shifted, fully, terribly, all at once, the Moon-Fae King's true wolf form, vast and silver-eyed and merciless, a creature out of the oldest and most frightening of the old stories. He tore through Cosmo's loyal hunters like the storm he had always been named for, scattering them across the marble. But Cosmo Aldekai was no fool and no mere swordsman. He was a weaver killer who had been planning this single night for 7 patient years. And as the great wolf bore down on him at last, Cosmo did not raise his blade to the wolf's body. He slashed it through the empty air between them and ripped every gray thread of the withering curse loose all at once. The curse exploded out of its slow, hidden creep. 7 years of patient gray death surged through the king's body in the space of a single heartbeat. The vast wolf collapsed mid-stride, crashing down onto the black marble with a sound like a falling mountain, the gray racing up its silver throat, over its jaw, toward its heart, fast now, faster than any healer alive could hope to mend, far too fast. "Leontinus!" Aurora threw herself bodily across the king's enormous fallen form, and she stopped hiding. Forever. Every seal that Yvain had set into her as an infant, every binding her weeping mother had begged for, every careful, invisible wall she had built and tended around herself for 20 long years of being small, of being gray, of being no one. She tore them all down at once. Silver thread light blazed out of her so bright and so sudden that the entire throne hall went white as the heart of the moon. The last thread weaver of the lost and hunted line, finally, fully, completely awake. Exactly the treasure her grandmother had died to hide and her mother had wept to bury. She plunged both blazing hands into the gray curse devouring the king, and beneath it, through her risen weaver sight, she saw the bond. The king's shattered mate thread, severed 7 years ago, the screaming open wound the wolf had bled over every single day since, the reason for all of it. And she understood, in that single blinding instant, the thing the wolf had always known and could never say. A bond cannot be replaced, but a thread weaver, a true one, fully woken, can mend a torn one, can take the severed end of a broken thread and weave it to a new anchor, a new heart, a living one, to hers. "Choose," Aurora gasped, weaving the king's broken thread toward her own hammering heart, even as she stripped Cosmo's curse out of him strand by burning strand, working both miracles at once, her whole body shaking with the effort. Your wolf has been reaching for me since the moment I walked into your hall. So choose, Leontinus. Claim me. Right now, or we both die together on this floor." The dying wolf lifted its great silver head, and the king's voice, ragged, raw, and certain, truly certain, for the first time in 7 long gray years, rolled out across the whole white-lit hall. "I claim you, Aurora of the Silver Thread, now and always. Mine." The bond snapped into place. The thread blazed gold between them, whole, woven, unbreakable, mated. And the very instant it caught and held, Aurora ripped the last of the withering curse out of the king's heart with both hands and turned it, all of it. Every gray strand, every patient year, every drop of that twofold murder, she turned it around and sent it racing back the way it had come, down its own threads, home to its caster. It found Cosmo Aldekai. His scream was the last sound the master of the hunt ever made. The curse he had so lovingly woven for a queen and then a king found its true master at last, the gray racing up him, into him, through him, exactly as it had done to Caelora, hour by hour, only all in a single instant now, and where the smiling golden man had stood, there was only a slow drift of gray ash, scattering soft as snow across the moonlit marble of the throne room floor. Silence. Then, slowly, the great silver wolf shimmered and shrank and gathered itself, and Leontinus Blasio knelt on the floor of his own throne hall, whole, healed, and breathing, staring at the woman who had been called nothing, with silver eyes that were not empty anymore. That would never be empty again. "You," he breathed. The gray was gone from his throat entirely. The skin was clean, and the wolf inside him was quiet, not screaming, not bleeding, for the first time in 7 years. Home. It was always going to be you, from the moment you spoke. They tried, of course, to deny her even then, even with the ash still scattered across the marble, even with the curse undone and the king's throat clean and the bond burning visibly gold between the two of them for the whole court to see. Lady Sibylla Vorn, on her knees in the gray ash, wept and pleaded confusion and conspiracy and claimed she'd been deceived. Magister Thornwald cleared his frost-rhymed throat and began carefully to speak of proper procedure and suitable matches and the manifest unfitness of a mongrel half-blood healer for the crown of the Veiled Moons. Leontinus rose to his full height, and the entire council remembered, all at once and far too late, exactly what their king actually was beneath the cold and the grief. "This woman," he said, and the hall fell so silent you could hear the ash settling, "unmasked a murderer that the 12 of you dined beside for 7 years. She broke a curse that killed your queen and would have killed your king within 2 winters. She is the last living daughter of the Silver Thread line, the oldest magic in the world, and she is bonded to me, body and soul and wolf." His silver gaze swept slowly across the half-moon of pale, frightened faces. "She will be your queen, and the first one of you to call her nothing again will discover precisely how merciful I am feeling on that day." No one in the court of Veiled Moons ever called Aurora anything but majesty again. Her father came to her, in the days that followed, and wept, and called her daughter as though he had always meant to. Ondine sank into a curtsy so low she nearly toppled and could not meet her sister's eyes. Aurora forgave them both, not because they had earned it, but because forgiveness was lighter to carry than the alternative, and because she finally, fully understood that she had never once needed their approval to be worth something. She had been worth something the whole time. They had simply refused to look. Mistress Yvain wept too, but differently. She held Aurora's face in her gnarled old hands and whispered that her mother would have been so proud, and that her grandmother, the hunted last weaver who had hidden a child in a fading house so the line might somehow live on, had been right in the end after all. Better a hunted treasure than a mocked nothing. Aurora had been both across the years. Now she was simply, fully herself, awake, unsealed, and at last truly seen. And then there was Leontinus, The Moon-Fae King, who had not smiled in 7 winters, smiled for her now, and often, in the moon garden where the night blooms opened only under silver light, in the hollow observatory among the drifting living stars, in the quiet deep dark of the small hours when the bond hummed warm and golden between their 2 hearts, and the wolf slept, content and quiet, for the first time since Caelora had been taken from him. Together they raised a new wing onto the side of the Black Mountain, a house for the sick and the broken and the overlooked and the unwanted, a healing order with its doors thrown open to half-bloods and mongrels and nothings, run by the queen who had once been all 3 and had survived being all 3 and remembered exactly what it had cost. They named it the Silver Thread House so that the lost line and the lesson of it would never be forgotten in that court again. On the night of her coronation, beneath a full moon pouring its silver down across the black marble, Leontinus drew her close against him and pressed his brow gently to hers. "They asked who claimed you," he murmured, "that first night, in my hall. And I said no one." "You did." His arms tightened around her. "Say it now." Aurora Volusus, queen of the veiled moons, last daughter of the silver thread line, the gray girl from the back row who was never, ever supposed to be anyone at all, looked up into the silver eyes of the king whose wolf had heard her whisper across a crowded hall and known her, instantly and completely, for what she was. "You," she whispered, "only ever you." And somewhere deep inside the king's chest, the wolf did not growl. This time, it purred. The end. So let's review tonight's hard-won life lessons, shall we? Never trust a man who smiles that much at a funeral. Always, always read the sealed section of the archives. And if your useless, defective power keeps making cursed immortal kings physically recoil, maybe, just maybe, it was never useless, and your entire family has been gaslighting you since birth. If Aurora's glow up from back row nobody to literal moon queen who turned a 7-year curse back on its smug little caster gave you life tonight, smash that subscribe button like Cosmo's reputation hitting the marble. We've got more dangerous kings, more overlooked heroines, and more thread-weaving chaos coming your way, and the algorithm is exactly as petty as that council was, so don't let it hide us in the back row where it can't see us. Drop a comment that says no one if you clocked Cosmo as rotten the second he opened his mouth. See you in the next dark.